Welcome to Boss Talk, where we talk about selling businesses. My name is Jim Parker. This is my business partner, Carey Sobel.
In episode 2 of Boss Talk, the topic today is the process of selling your business. We're excited to go through these steps with you. And as we go through them, it's really important to understand a critical point is that your business may not actually be ready to sell, right? We're going to assume today that the business is ready to sell. And when we go through the process of selling a business, I want to make it clear that no two deals are the same. There's always nuances, there's always things that are different, but the general topics and things that we go through this process are similar. So let's talk about pre-listing, right? So before you actually list a business, how do you handle the process from that introductory call to a signed listing agreement? Talk about that introductory call when you're first coming in contact with somebody who's interested in selling.
I look at that introductory call. Obviously, that's the kickoff to potentially myself and the seller working together. So I think it's a very critical call. And in that call, I want to obviously kind of give you, with the business owner, kind of an overview of things that we do, how Boss Group operates and works. But I also want to understand what you, as a business owner, are looking to get out of this. I want to climb inside your head. Why are you looking to sell? What are you going to do after you sell the business? What are the things that you want from the sale? Besides money, obviously, what kind of buyer do you see yourself doing? I know this is your baby. You built this business from nothing. You've nurtured it. You've raised it. You've grown it, and now you're ready to let it go. And I think part of that too, Carey, is, and I challenge the business owner when I'm on the phone call with them too, is what is it going to look like for you when you actually are signing the paperwork to actually close on the business? Because it is their baby. And
it's emotional.
A few years ago, I'm going to tell you, this is a few years ago, I had a business owner that was a big, burly guy, a man's man, and real kind of rough and tough, nice guy, but he was very manly. This is back when we were doing a lot of closings, that were not virtual, and he was tearing up at the closing table. He was tearing up. I had to call him outside the closing room, away from everybody else, and I had a heart-to-heart with him. I'm like, can you do this? Are you okay? And he's like, I really do want to sell. I think the buyer is a great person, and I think we found the perfect buyer, but and I'm ready to move on to my next chapter of my life, but it was hard for him to let it go. And I want to paint that picture to a business owner when I'm talking to him on the phone. Are you, when it comes down to it, are you going to be able to pull that trigger?
It's less transactional, right? I mean,
right.
When you have the introductory call, like you said, you want to understand the motivations behind it and all of the little nuances that are related to the why of this conversation and it's happening. So you could probably relate back that introductory call and those conversations to when you were standing outside of the closing table, right?
Right, exactly. And I think it's just, that's a big thing, is me understanding really from the seller's point of view, what they're trying to accomplish. And from there, it's me educating them as well, but I also, on the process, but we also talk about, the business. I want to have them give me a brief description about their business and tell me a little bit about it so I can start understanding their business. And a lot of times I'll ask for their website while I'm still on the phone with them if they're calling me before we have a scheduled meeting. A scheduled meeting, I'll check out their website beforehand. Yeah. I look up things and read reviews and things like that. But if somebody's calling me up and it's the first time we were talking and I wasn't expecting that call, I ask them for the website so I can look at it. And I want to understand what their business is, get an overview of their business. I'm not trying to get all the ins and outs on that phone call. Just trying to get the overview. What's the makeup of their customer base? What's the makeup of their employee situation? How are they doing marketing and advertising? What's their client concentration kind of look like? What are the trends on the financials been? The basic information about their business.
And sometimes you're looking for an immediate red flag to find out if it makes sense to go to the next step, because the next step after an introductory call is a collection of financials and asking some more deeper questions. So, if the red flag comes up day one, hold on, this may not be worth it, right? Let's move on to the next thing. But if you do take the next step, it's now really the quantitative part of the business, which is what does the business do in top line revenue, gross profit, net revenue? comparing that to what maybe industries are doing, other businesses in the industry are doing, but you're collecting the financial information,
right.
and general questionnaire is a second step, right?
Right. Going back to that first step real quick, you made a good point about, is it a good fit? It's the systems and processes that I have, and I'm sure it's the same way that you have, because we have the same similar processes and systems, is that it's got to fit my wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. I'm really, really good at selling the type of businesses that I sell. I've kind of mastered that, and that's probably a whole podcast on its own. I know people probably out there going, but that's probably a whole podcast, and there's nothing I can say in a minute or two. But if it's outside that wheelhouse, it's like throwing a wrench into the wheels of my systems and processes, and it clogs it up, and it's not good for the seller, and it's not good for me. Sometimes a different broker at Boss Group's better for that particular business and that business owner. Sometimes it's a broker outside of our company that's better for that business than I am. Or maybe, like you said, they're not quite ready to sell, so I can tell them why, point them in the right direction so that they can redo that. The initial call, I'm not trying to look at everything, but I'm trying to just get enough feel from that seller. Is this something that would be good for my systems and processes, that they can see the results that I get from my clients? Are they able to get that as well? But moving on to the financials, that'd be the next step, is working on the broker's opinion of value. I typically ask for 3 years of either business tax returns or profit and loss statements, balance sheets for those same years, year-ending balance sheets, and a trailing 12-month P&L on where we're currently sitting and the most up-to-date balance sheet. And from there, I'm looking at those financials. And when I'm looking at those financials, Carey, and you're doing the same thing as well, what is the seller trying to do? You're trying to reduce your tax liability. What's your CPA doing? Trying to reduce your tax liability. So with your help, I'm going to be unwinding all that to see how much somebody could really make from that business. And while I'm also doing that, is I'm looking at the fixed expenses and the variable expenses, and I'm trying to see if there's a big jump in, let's say, cost of goods, percentage of cost of goods versus gross sales. What are some things that are happening year to year that might stand out? I'm looking to see trends from year to year on gross sales. Trying to benchmark it versus other industries to see if it's how it's performing against other businesses in the same industry. So.
And a broker opinion of value is exactly what it says. It is our opinion of the value. At the end of the day, a business is going to sell at what somebody's willing to pay for it. So our job is to come up with a value that we think, based off of our knowledge and expertise and understanding of your industry and your financial historical performance, what we think the business's most probable selling price is. So we generate a broker opinion of value, and we have a methodology in which we do that. Mm-hmm. And then we take that broker opinion of value and we go into an assessment call. And it usually serves as the basis for the assessment call of, here's what I saw, those trends that you notice, and maybe jumps in cost of goods or reduction in rent. What changed is prompting a lot of the questions in the assessment call, where you're ultimately coming to that call to deliver that seller, the question that they have day one. What's my business worth?
Right. Sometimes not. And sometimes that assessment call, you're right. Sometimes that assessment call happens after I do the broker's opinion of value, or sometimes that assessment call happens, while I'm in the process of doing the broker's opinion of value.
Because you have questions.
Because
right?
I have questions that, more questions than I can get back and forth by email, and I need to jump on the phone with the seller and get down to certain things. But also looking at assessment calls, just there's a lot of different questions that I'm going to ask. I'm looking for the skeletons in the closet, or the uglies about the business, and that's okay if there's skeletons in the closet, or because no business out there is perfect, but it's really important at the same time that we know as a business intermediary what those problems are in your business. What are those things that are keeping you up at night? Those potential things that buyers might frown upon. It's really important that we know that up front. And yes, it might be a situation where we say you have to correct that before we can go to the market, or maybe we can go to the market now and we can overcome those kind of situations. But those are conversations that we're going to have at some point with a buyer, And it's better that we bring those things out to a buyer instead of the buyer finding out on their own.
So when I said in the beginning that, it's always a critical component of, is the business even ready to sell? So this assessment call
helps them determining
that. Right.
Yeah, right.
So you're determining, or talking about the broker opinion of value, maybe the types of buyers that might be looking at the business, asking about the skeletons in the closet, asking about, any information that you should know in determining if we should be bringing this business to market.
Right.
If
correct.
it's possible to do a listing. Great. So let's say in the assessment call, you've decided we're going to bring this business to market.
Or we would like to.
We would like to.
Because so we want to, the seller has to make sure that they like us. Cause,
yes.
I just wanted to point that out. If you call us and we start engaging, we don't charge any upfront fees, and you're not obligated to use our services. So we can do a broker's opinion of value, tell you what the most probable selling price of the business is, and you're not obligated to use our services, and you don't pay for that. So, but that along with the assessment call, that's all. There's no obligation to us at all.
Yeah.
And
it's the double-edged sword of our industry, right? But I'm fine doing it. I actually enjoy doing it. It's fun looking at different businesses. It makes us more knowledgeable. And even if we provide Mr. or Mrs. Seller with this information, they probably didn't have that information prior. They appreciate the time that we're giving them. They'll keep us in mind. They'll refer us out there. But if we do decide to take a step forward, really what we're doing is establishing the terms and conditions of our relationship with that seller. And prior to...
us doing it together, the seller,
right.
Us working together on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's a critical step in here where, we take our broker opinion of value and what we think, but we hold that up against sometimes what the Small Business Administration would consider qualifying. Can you talk a little bit about how that process works?
If in most of my deals, I would say 95% of the deals that I work with in my space, and I don't necessarily think the percentage is totally true with Carey, because Carey does work on some bigger deals too, but most of the deals that I'm selling, I'm in that price range. I consider myself an upper Main Street business broker. So it's not usually a target for a private equity group. Not even usually a target for a strategic buyer, which would be more M&A, and Carey does work on the M&A. And it's also not businesses selling for $200,000. Typically, I'm selling businesses that have gross sales between $1 million and $10 million. Most of my businesses that I'm working with, the business owners I'm working with, the buyer is going to be getting an SBA loan, Small Business Administration loan, and that's a whole process. And before I actually tell the seller what the most probable selling price is, I go to a lender or two that I have really good relationships with. I think we work with some of the best lenders out there because we've been through a lot of lenders.
Yes.
We work, and I want to make sure the lender is on board too, because the last thing I want to do is tell a seller, hey, your business is worth X amount of dollars, and I can't get a lender on board, because those buyers are going to be looking for a lender.
Yeah.
So I'll be coming forward and giving you an actual, pre-qualification letter.
And we'll be discussing pre-qualification and SBA and the use of SBA terms and financing in other episodes, but it's certainly a critical part of the way that we sell businesses, is validating our broker opinion of value and most probable selling price on, can a financier offer the same type of financing for a buyer that could acquire that business.
Right.
So let's assume now that we're through the pre-listing. You've agreed to terms. You've agreed to a price point. Seller has signed on the dotted line, and now we are in pre-market and marketing development.
This is my funnest time. This is what I love. This is a stage that I love the most, and I also think it's the most critical part of the process. I think the broker's opinion of value obviously is very critical. Doing the correct add backs and unwinding the buyer and the sellers. The seller and the CPA's, reduction of taxes. I'm just put it that way. This is very critical, because we're now getting ready to go to market.
So we're in marketing development.
Yeah.
And it typically starts off with a discovery call.
Yep.
You've done your initial introductory call. You've done your assessment call. This is a full discovery call. This is where we're lifting up the hood. We're looking at everything that's underneath it. We're turning over rocks. Talk a little bit about a discovery call.
Yeah. So the discovery call it usually takes about 2 hours. And jump on a call with the seller, and I have a lot of questions for them about the business. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to educate myself as much as I possibly can on their business. Up to this point, to do the broker's opinion of value, I just need enough questions to do the broker's opinion of value.
Right.
But now we're moving forward, and I have to have conversations with a buyer So I need to be able to talk intelligently about the seller's business. So this is the opportunity. It takes usually about 2 hours. And I'm asking them all different types of questions, from the history of the business to, the current status to employee makeup. I mean, it goes on and on and on, a lot of questions. And also I'm doing is I'm recording that. I do not keep the recording. It's a temporary recording. Take that recording, plus we run it through an AI program where it gives us a transcript of everything we talked about, and give that transcript and the recording to our professional writer. And the gentleman that I use the most, he's not just a professional writer, but he's a business writer, so he writes for business purposes, and he's very accomplished. He's really good at what he does. And he writes up a report on the business. And he's under a confidentiality agreement with our company. And then we take that report and give it to a professional graphic designer. The professional graphic designer takes that report and creates like a 25, 30 page, sometimes a little bit longer than that, what we call Confidential Information Memorandum, CIM, C-I-M. And that is a report talking about the business, broken down into many, many different, components of the business.
What are some of the items that are on the table of contents in that CIM?
We have an executive summary, so it kind of gives an overview of what that business is about. Then we have a business overview, which is it's kind of different than the executive summary. Yep. And then we have a history of the business, about the owner, employee section, marketing and advertising, financial section,
operations, vendors,
equipments. I mean, there's a bunch of different sections in that confidential information memorandum. But she makes this report, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Because this is the thing, Carey. It's part of the program. When we go to the market and buyers start inquiring, and first of all, only buyers that have signed a confidentiality agreement have given us a look at what their financial situation is, either through a financial net worth statement or some other means. We have a bio or a resume of their experience. We know what their motivation is. We're basically pre-qualifying or pre-screening that buyer to make sure that buyer is a right type of potential owner of your business. And so once we pre-screen them and they've signed that confidentiality agreement, and we feel comfortable with them, that's when we give them the report. But the whole through, and I just want to say this real quick. When we're selling a business, we don't want anybody to know that your business is for sale.
Right.
We don't want your employees to know, your customers to know, your vendors to know, your competitors to know. We don't want anybody to know that business is for sale until you close on your business and you get your money. That's when it should be announced. So we're keeping it confidential. So we're very careful in pre-screening the buyers to make sure that we're keeping that confidentiality there. So it's not like tons and tons of people are going to see this CIM. But what we want to happen is those buyers that we think are really good potential buyers for the business, when they open up that CIM, I mean, within a second or two, I want to grab their attention like that and then be like, wow, this is something different than I've seen. That's why we hire a professional graphic designer. That's why we're not creating it ourselves. As a business broker, I'm good at it as a business broker. I'm sure I could design something on Word. Most brokers do design something on Word. I want to have something that's designed by a professional graphic designer that's custom to the seller's business. And I want that buyer, as soon as they open it, be like, wow, that awe factor. I've never seen anything like that, and I get that all the time from buyers. Is like, wow, that is the nicest presentation I've ever seen, and I've looked at a lot of that.
We do hear it pretty often. And you mentioned, it's a 2-hour call, right? Yeah. So, some people that are business owners that are working with us are like, oh, that sounds like a lot, but
it's a fun call.
Well, we're saving them so much time.
We're sending them so much time in the front end.
The goal of those CIMs are to answer the majority of the questions that a buyer is going to have about the business anyway. It reduces some of the back and forth. It reduces the need to hop on so many phone calls and tie up that seller's time.
Right.
So when that information is sent over to draw up a CIM, we're also drawing up what's called a BP, a business profile, or a teaser. And this is a fully confidential, one.
There's no name on the business.
No name on the business. It's not giving away where it is. It's not giving away any information that a person could be like, oh, I think it's that business over there. Right. So the first step of the process in somebody engaging with this is it will be a BP, and then they get the CIM only after they've been qualified.
You're absolutely right, and I apologize. Carey, you're absolutely right. I forgot about the BP. I didn't forget about it, but I have a team. We have a support team that kind of handles that process because it doesn't have the name of the business on there. That's what we give out to buyers to get them excited. That's why it's called a teaser. To kind of tease them, to get them excited, to give us additional information that we need to pre-screen them as a buyer. So
in marketing development, we have our BP, we have our SIM, and then we've adopted another process.
Well, I want to talk about the writer too, because I think it's really critical. We talked about the graphic designer, like within a second, I want them to be, wow, that's nice, and it's custom to that particular business. But the writer too is, I could sit down and write a SIM. A lot of brokers write down SIMs, but I want to have a professional writer. And this gentleman, he, like I said before, he's a business writer. That's what he does. And he's very accomplished. We want it to be informative, but we want it to be entertaining, and we also want the buyer to get excited and want to take the next step. So that whole package is just critical. The SIM is just a critical part of the component of the process.
Completely agreed.
Yeah.
And in the SIM, sometimes it's not in the SIM, but we record those seller interviews, right?
Yes.
And
a separate one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So, buyers are always like, I want to meet the seller. And we are gatekeeping the seller from meeting all of the buyers, because sometimes buyers are liars. Sometimes buyers are tire kickers. And it's our job to locate the buyers that really are truly looking for their next endeavor. They're not just, surfing the internet looking for what might be or what could come. They are actually looking to acquire a business. So if we're going through that process, we want to make sure that they're pre-screened properly.
Right. Correct. And I think that interview. So this is separate from the discovery call. In case you guys are listening in here, it's after we have the discovery call. Probably usually about a week after we do that, we have a second call, and it takes about 45 minutes to an hour. It's recorded through a program similar to Zoom, but it's got a better quality, much better quality than Zoom. The video quality is much better. But it is, myself and you, if it was your listing, I'm interviewing the seller on the business, and we're recording the video and the audio. And it's typically the questions that buyers are going to ask the most often. And a lot of those questions I already asked in the initial discovery call, and it's going to be written in the SIM, but the buyers want to hear it from the sellers. They can read it, but they want to hear it directly from the seller. So we're trying to cut off because the next stage we're going to get to is the buyer-seller phone call, where the buyer and the seller get on a call with us as the brokers, and there's like a little interview going on back and forth. Well, like Carey said, we want to minimize those calls, because my job is to create as much interest as I possibly can in your business when we take it to the market. And so hopefully we have a lot of buyers. Well, the last thing I want to do at that point is for you to have a lot of buyer-seller phone calls that are an hour long. So by having this recording, and this is optional, if you don't want to be in front of the camera, and you don't want to do this is totally okay, but I strongly urge you do it, is I interview, take that recording, and we put it into a system where the general public cannot get access to it. It's a private link. And we put that link inside that SIM that we were talking about. They click on that link, and it's an interview for about 45 minutes to an hour with the most common questions that buyers ask. And, it's a fantastic tool. And what I found from using that is that the calls either are much shorter when they do talk to the seller, or the questions are much more in-depth questions. And actually, this year alone, I've had a couple offers that have come in on business listings that I have, and they've never talked to the seller. And I'm like, you haven't even talked to the seller. And like, yeah, no, between the SIM and the interview, I feel 100% confident and comfortable. I want to move forward, I'm like, that's great. I'll propose the offer to the seller, but I always do require that the seller and the buyer do talk and have that buyer-seller phone call with me involved before we actually accept an offer. I'm just not going to have that happen unless they actually talk.
So we've worked pretty much through the marketing development process. So let's say we've got all of our tools now. We've got our BP, our SIM, we have our interviews conducted. We go through some general advertising. We make sure that the title of a listing or a teaser that we're going to put out there is engaging enough that somebody is going to want to click on it. And now the process is, like you said, locate as many buyers as we possibly can.
Right.
So we're through marketing development. Now we're going to market. how critical is it to make sure that everything is done before you go to market, and talk through deploying a listing onto the market?
I think it's extremely critical. We have everything lined up, before we do it. We have the BP done, we have the SIM done, we have that interview done if the seller is willing to do the interview. And we're also sitting there starting to strategize who is the most likely type of buyer for that business and what kind of message do we want to get across. We don't want to be promoting your business as if we're looking for a customer. We know what the hot buttons are for buyers, and talking about how great the product is. It's nice to talk about that, and we need to talk about it, but remember, we're not trying to sell a customer. We're trying to find a buyer for your business. So we're tailoring the messages that we're getting across to buyers, and by knowing what type of buyers that we're looking for your business. And we also have sold tons and tons of businesses over the years. I know what the hot buttons are. Carey knows what the hot buttons are, and those are the points that we're trying to get across in that marketing and advertising. And we market and advertise. If it's okay, we can kind of talk about how we market and advertise.
Yeah, and I think too, a key point is that if there is a motivated buyer out there that is looking for a business, they're trying to find the business, and we properly put that business on the market, they're going to find it.
If they're putting any little bit of effort into it at all,
they're going to find our listings.
They're going to find it.
We do proper targeting. We have proper titles. We make sure that the package looks good, from the graphics to the design. Everything is all buttoned up. And everything that we do is confidential. We always talk about the differences of selling a home and selling a business. If you're selling a home, you're putting a sign on the front yard and having everybody come to an open house. Hey, look at my house. It is for sale. I want as many people as I can possibly get to do that.
Yeah.
You don't do that when you're selling a business. It has to be done confidentially. It has to be done respectfully. And it has to be done with a lot of diligence. So let's talk about how we market something confidentially. How do we do that?
Yeah, sometimes it can be difficult. But you alluded to it earlier, too. When we are putting together the materials we're putting out there, we can't even we're not putting the name of the business, but we also don't want to put certain information out there where people can guess which business it is that's for sale.
That's right.
So we got to be very conscious of that type of a situation too.
And one of the first things that we do in our process when we are bringing a business to market is one of the advantages of Boss Group is we have an incredible database of active buyers and sellers. I think it's one of our secret sauces.
Yeah, we got a huge database of buyers,
and sometimes
buyers.
As we're in
different types of buyers, individual buyers, private equity group buyers, family offices. I mean.
They're categorized by what they're interested in. Are they interested in the price of X and Y? Do they like manufacturing? Do they like hospitality?
Yeah.
So
that's I would say that's probably the biggest hot button we have at Boss Group. Yes. is our massive database.
And it helps with confidentiality because we may be in the process of marketing development, and we either remember somebody from that database, or we can do a query for we're looking for, if it's a business we're bringing to market, let's say in the Southeast region, and it's manufacturing. Well, we go into our database and we look at all of those individuals. And this BP, business profile or teaser that we have, we're going to send it out to all the people that are in our database as we're bringing it to market right away, and see before we blast it out on the internet confidentially, or before we put it on the multiple listing service with the BBF, we're going to see if we have an active candidate that's looking for that type of business within our database. So we're trying to matchmake day one based off of the knowledge and information we have inside of this database. So that in-house database is the best way that we can confidentially market a business.
Right, absolutely. I think that's probably the number one. I think another big thing is, as brokers, we're talking every day to other brokers.
Yeah.
Outside of our company, inside of our company, we're constantly talking to other brokers. So that's always a great opportunity. Hey, by the way, I've got such and such business that's coming to the market, or I just took this business to the market. You got a buyer for that. And those informal conversations that you have with brokers, golden.
You get a lot of deals done that way.
Yeah, you do.
And this is another.
And just having great relationships with other brokers is very
Well, there's
important.
some brokers to that point that we love transacting with, and we'll just call and be like, hey, do you have this? Do you have that? I have this. I have that.
Yeah.
But when we talk about differences of marketing, a home or marketing a business, there's also a big similarity there that people don't know about, and we'll address it more in a future episode about co-brokering. But we're transaction brokers, and we co-broke, and we belong to the Business Brokers of Florida. And we share in the BBF a multiple listing service, which is a active database where all of the brokers are putting their listings within certain parameters so that other brokers can represent prospects to our businesses that we have listed for sale, so we can actually co-broke.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's unfortunate because we can't do that outside of Florida because there's no other state or regional association in the country that has a co-broking situation like we do have in Florida. So that Florida's the only place in the whole country that has a situation like that. But it doesn't mean that we can't place phone calls. I know brokers, and you know brokers all over the country, Canada, we know brokers everywhere that, we can still make calls and have introductions with, say, hey, we've got such great business. Do you have any buyers?
Yep.
Rather keep it in house with our particular database, but we're gonna pull out all the stops.
Yep.
We're gonna come out swinging hard. It doesn't matter where that buyer is coming from at the end of the day. We want to create as much buyer interest as we possibly can in your business in order to get it not only sold, but to maximize what that sales price is. And if it means co-broking with another broker, we're going to do that. And we embrace that situation.
Most certainly.
So, and then we market and advertise on third-party
websites.
On the internet as well. We do that. There's a bunch of different things we do. We've got access to private equity group situations, and we go on and on and on. A lot of things that we do, we really probably don't want to be discussing in a public forum, as you can understand as a business owner yourself.
But we do a damn good job of it.
But we do a good job.
And getting the business profiles and teasers out to buyers that are looking for businesses that we have listed for sale is the name of our game. It's matchmaking. Yep. And it's funny enough, when I talk to sellers, they're always telling me, what if I bring a buyer to the table? Will you reduce your commission or something like that? The hardest part, or the easiest part, I think, in this entire process that we're discussing is actually making the match, is locating a buyer and a seller and putting them together. Yeah. I don't think it is nearly as hard, especially with today's technology. A common name that I can say that everybody knows is Biz Buy Sell. Right? Yeah. Everybody goes on to Biz Buy Sell. That's one of the places where our businesses are. So there's always buyers and there's always sellers that we're making matches on. But really, when we get into the next step is, I think, one of the most challenging processes. And this is pre-screening buyers. The most fun part about our business, right? Pre-screening buyers. I'm being facetious there.
Yeah.
So let's discuss buyers. Let's talk about the process of somebody has located one of the listings that we have and they're reaching out to us to take the next step.
Yeah, buyers. So we're pre-screening the buyers. We're having those conversations with the buyers. We're immediately having them sign a confidentiality agreement, so that they're not going to disclose that it's your business that's for sale. And we're trying to understand what their financial situation is. How much their net worth is. How much of the money is liquid. How much is invested. What can we do, or how they're going to be trying to acquire that business. Are they going to be doing an SBA loan? Are they going to have to do a Rob's 401k to pull that money out? We've got to look at that financial situation and see where they sit. And if they're going to go the SBA route, do we think they're going to qualify for an SBA loan? And get into the conversations with them. We want to know their background, their experience. If they need a special licensing, do they have that special licensing, or do they have access through somebody else to get that special licensing? That's critical. And their motivation level. They're very serious about buying a business, or are they tire kickers? How long have they looked? What struggles have they had in the process of buying a business? And
there's particular tactics that we use, or like flags that we're looking out for. And an example I always give is the hospitality industry. Owning a restaurant is very difficult. And if you don't understand the restaurant industry, you really should not be trying to dive into it. I had a buyer that was rolling over his 401k after he retired as a CPA, and he goes, I want to own a restaurant. And I tried so hard to convince him to look at another industry. He had no experience in it. He never worked a day in a restaurant in his life. He had the money to acquire the restaurant he was looking at. And ultimately, I did show him that business. But I genuinely care about matchmaking and not just chasing a commission, but building a relationship with a person to successfully acquire or sell a business. So Mr. Buyer, before you roll over your 401k to buy a restaurant, you've never worked a day in a restaurant in your life, the margins are thin, the hours are long, please make sure that you're making the right decision. So, it's just a point that when we're pre-screening these buyers, just as we build relationship with sellers, if it is a qualified buyer that we want to work with, we want to build that same rapport with them. Yeah. Now, the loyalty is a little bit different with buyers, right? Because if a business opportunity comes listed for sale, they're going to go to that business. They may not utilize us. But if we have an opportunity to build the rapport with them and learn about them, and we learn about what the buyer's motivations are, we learn about what the buyer's looking for in a business, we can go on a really deep, detailed search to try to help them locate their business. So,
and I prefer not. I like working the seller side. I stopped working on the buyer side a couple years ago. I love the listing side of the equation, and I love working with buyers in the sense when they're looking at a listing that I have. You know, and obviously I don't start building that relationship until after we get done with the negotiation process. And we have a good relationship, but we start building it afterwards, doing that. But yeah.
Great. All right, so moving on, Jim, we're through pre-screening buyers. We've located a couple of our buyers that are interested in acquiring a business. We've validated that they have the experience, that they have the financial aptitude to acquire a business and the right motivation. So now we're going to set up a buyer-seller meeting. And they're always interesting. They're always different, right? We're bringing together two different people that don't know each other from Adam. And it's an emotional process for Mr. Seller. And for Mr. Buyer, he's just trying to get on to the next stage of whatever it is that he's looking to do. How do you go about conducting some of these buyer-seller meetings? Are there any rules, do's, or don'ts? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so first of all, I like to begin with a buyer-seller phone call, and to begin with instead of an in-person meeting. So, because usually when we do an in-person meeting, you know, it's going to be after hours or before hours or on the weekend, and you know that's a big time commitment for the seller, and I don't want to put the seller out.
Is it when you talk about buyer-seller calls? Would you separate that from a Zoom, or would you now, in today's day and age, include that together?
I would include that together,
okay.
Either a call or virtual.
So the difference is either being physically together at the location or
regular phone call / Zoom call.
Okay.
You know, and a lot of times the business owners can't get away from the office to do a Zoom call. You know, so they can sit in their truck and they can make a phone call, but they can't, you know, get to a computer outside. So a lot of times it's a phone call. But, you know, we want to make those phone calls. We only want to get a buyer on the phone with a seller on a call when we really feel good about that buyer.
Right.
You know, we don't want to waste the seller's time, and I think that's really important. And at that point, hopefully that buyer has already talked to an SBA lender, because I want them to have a pre-qual letter for them, that the bank has looked at them and said, yeah, I want to do it. Even if it's not a lender of mine, even if it's their lender, I want to see a letter. You want to jump on the phone call with the seller, you should have a pre-qualification from an SBA lender saying that you can actually acquire the business. And you need that, not particularly this business. You should have that whether you're buying this business, that business, or this business.
Correct.
So, you know, I know sometimes buyers give pushback and go, well, I want to talk to the seller first. It's like, well, you're in the market to buy a business. You should have a pre-qual letter from a lender so that they feel good about you.
Assuming that they're not buying it in cash or
any other means. Yeah, I'm talking about SBA lending. So you're exactly right, Carey. So I'm asking for that at that point. Again, it doesn't have to be one of my lenders. It could be somebody that they've approached. And then, you know, hopefully we've done, and the seller's been okay doing that video, you know, where they're at, where I'm asking the basic questions. So we jump on a call, and usually we start off with the buyer talking for 5 or 7 minutes about themselves, their background, their experience to the seller, so the seller can hear that directly from the buyer. And then we turn it over to the seller. Seller gives an overview of the business, and then the buyer can, you know, ask, you know, whatever questions the buyer wants to ask outside of some key questions. I mean, one of the things we do not want to do in that call is we do not want a buyer to try to negotiate, you know, will you take X amount of dollars or negotiate terms or anything like that. This should be all high level, you know, at this point.
It's kind of like a first date.
Yeah, really it is.
How much engagement or talking are you doing in these calls? At least the initial ones.
Right. So I've been in a lot of buyer-seller phone calls and in-person meetings.
Sure.
And sometimes I've seen another broker on the other side. If there's another broker involved, a lot of times they're very active in these conversations. To me, I want to get on the call and I want to introduce the seller to the buyer, kind of outline how the meeting is going to go about, and then I want to just keep my mouth quiet. I want the buyer and the seller to do most of the talking. I want to do very, very little talking, because it's about the buyer understanding the business directly from the seller. It's about the seller getting to know the buyer, because this is their baby. They created this business from scratch. I want them to know, hey, this is a buyer that I want to be taking over my baby. It's a buyer that I feel comfortable that can keep that legacy going or not. It's important that the buyer, feels the personality of the seller. And I feel like the more we talk as a broker on that call, the more we're not really making the process. Our work has happened all the way up to that call. Our work's going to happen after that call. This call, in my opinion, and I'm strongly for this, it's about the buyer and the seller. Now, I do jump in if a buyer asks a question to the seller and the seller, starts talking about it but gets off track. I might be like, well, blah, blah, blah. Or if there's a miscommunication or a potential miscommunication, then I jump in. But for the most part, I want those two to be talking among themselves.
I wonder if it would be beneficial if you brought one of these with you, and if they get off topic.
Yeah, just buzz them. Yeah. These are our buzzers in case one of us gets off topic, or talks too much.
So it's about allowing buyer and seller to build some rapport.
Yeah.
Do they feel that they're trustworthy, that they want to continue the conversation? So buyers coming in, they have questions they want to ask, right?
Right.
Seller, first time selling their business, are you giving them any coaching about what to expect and what type of questions may be asked going into this?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got some videos that I have that I can provide a seller to kind of get them to understand what they can expect from a buyer-seller phone call, and as well as a list of typical questions they might be asked. At the end of the day, I only work with sellers that I feel that are likable and trustworthy, because I feel like a buyer has to like and trust a seller. And so a lot of times, when the seller can call me anytime, before the call and pick my brain, but I always say, I'll give them some pointers, but at the end of the day, I say, just be you. Yep. Be you. That's why I listed your business, because I like you, I trust you, you got a good business, and don't be afraid to talk about the uglies or the things that are not as good in your business. I think that comes across good. It comes across, first of all, I think you should do it from an ethical standpoint. The buyer's looking at buying your business. You need to tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yep.
Put it all on the table. Don't let
authentic.
them find out during due diligence. The deal's going to fall apart anyways. And plus, you're doing the right thing. And I think buyers appreciate that. I know buyers appreciate that when a seller's forward about that.
Do you often see multiple buyer-seller meetings, either in person or on the phone, before you're going under contract?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to create as much interest as I possibly can in that business. And I want to try to get as many offers in as I possibly can in that business in the shortest period of time. So although we want to reduce the amount of time the seller is spending on a phone call or an in-person meeting, I think they're going to be doing multiple calls.
Right.
My job is to not, and sometimes it falls through the cracks, because buyers might tell me something that they didn't tell. They tell the seller when we get on a buyer-seller phone call, they didn't tell me. That happens once in a while. You can't control everything. But for the most part, we want to get only the buyers in a meeting that are really good quality buyers. But we want to have multiple of those calls, because we're trying to get multiple offers, because we're trying to get the highest price we possibly can. And the way we get the highest price is get to have multiple buyers looking at the business.
And it's advantageous for us as brokers, because in every one of these buyer and seller calls, all we're doing is adding more information to our confidential information memorandum, our SIM. We're building a list of frequently asked questions that we hear every single time that the buyer and the seller meet. It's empowering us with more knowledge of the business to better represent it. And we're ultimately just answering those questions on the front end, so they're not going to come up the second time we have a buyer-seller meeting.
Right. And that's what we're trying to do too, is we have that discovery call, which is the 2-hour call. We're trying to ask all the questions that a buyer would ask, and we're trying to learn 95% of the questions that a buyer is going to ask, so we have that information. But obviously, we can't think of everything. So buyers sometimes have lots of questions. Some buyers don't have very many questions. And what we got to do is we got to look at those questions that buyers are asking. We got to put them in 2 buckets. One bucket being, these are good questions, but they don't need to be asked right now. These are questions that you're going to get that should be at a different stage of the game. Or they're good questions that we're like, okay, these are good questions that I can understand a buyer would want to know, And so we'll go to the seller and we'll ask the seller these questions, get those answers, and then we do create that frequently asked questionnaire so that future buyers have that same question.
It's a really good point you brought up, that there is a line of that's maybe too far before due diligence, before you're under contract. So we want buyers to feel comfortable enough to place an offer, but then when it gets to the point where you're looking at really detailed information about the business, sometimes it could be a vendor list or a customer list or deep financials or copies of tax returns. You want to go into due diligence, and depending on maybe the amount of interest that we have on a business, is that threshold or that benchmark may move in what we're willing to give up.
Right.
But the next stage, which we've kind of segued into, is what I think is the most challenging part of a business brokerage deal for us is contract to close. Mm-hmm. So now let's talk about. We've done a couple buyer-seller meetings. Maybe it's one, maybe it's 20.
And then you a lot of times move into an in-person buyer-seller phone call where the buyer and the seller get together. Seller's showing them their shop and their equipment, things like that. Yeah.
So assuming all that's happened and now we've got some type of structured offer, whether it's in the form of a IOI or an LOI or a APA.
APA is an asset purchase agreement. LOI is a letter of intent. IOI is indication of interest.
And in another episode, we'll talk about all the different contract forms. But either way, we're saying buyer has now taken the next step to move forward in acquiring a business. And let's start with accepting an offer, and let's move into due diligence, and let's move into getting to the closing table. Let's start with accepting an offer. So we'll work with a buyer or a broker's buyer for representing the listing, and we will present the offers to Mr. Seller. Whether we get one offer or we get X amount of offers, whatever it is, we're legally obligated to present all the offers to a seller. And we help the seller go through the terms and conditions of all the offers that are presented. And most times the seller is looking for one thing: what's the highest offer? And we always encourage that seller that there are terms that could be jading a high-priced offer with holdbacks or extended due diligence. Earnouts, or there's so many different triggers inside of an offer, and it's our job to take this, decent sized document and make sure that we're educating the sellers about all the different things inside of a purchase contract or an LOI.
Yeah.
All right, Jim. So let's talk now. We've located a couple buyers that are interested in taking the next step in the business, and they're going to place either an IOI, an indication of interest, an LOI, a letter of intent, or an APA, an asset purchase agreement. Mm-hmm. And in another episode, we'll talk about the different types of contract structures and documentation involved in a buyer engaging in acquiring a business. But let's just say that we've gotten an offer now. Mm-hmm. Let's say we've gotten two offers, and our seller's never sold the business before. So it's our job to explain to the seller all the different aspects of a contract to the best of our ability. Of course, we're not attorneys, so all we can do is say, this is what this means, or this is what this price could insinuate. But
talk to your attorney.
Talk to your CPA, see how this could affect your position.
And then if I could pause right there, Carey, and when we say that too, the one thing you got to keep in mind is that the attorney that you're used to using might be a fantastic attorney, and they might be a great business attorney, but when you're dealing with selling your business, you need to talk to an attorney that's what they specialize in, is helping people put terms together for selling or buying a business. Whether it's an M&A attorney or an attorney that just does transactions, that's really important.
It is.
Because, sometimes I've come across that situation. I want to tell you the weirdest situation I ever had, Carey, is that I was working on a deal as my buyer. It was another broker's seller, and the seller hired an attorney that was not an M&A attorney, and my buyer hired an attorney that did do M&A work. But those two attorneys, they didn't get along, and they
shocker.
And the one attorney that was helping the seller was so off they were trying. What an attorney's trying to do is they're trying to protect their client, right? So they're trying to do everything they can to do to protect their client, but there's like a realm of reason when you're selling a business. You can't ask for this because there's no buyer's going to ever buy your business. Or if you're a buyer, your attorney can't ask for this because no seller would accept it. So there's like this realm of reality that a good M&A attorneys work within. Well, that seller's attorney was way out here. anyways, like these two attorneys didn't get along. 3 weeks go by. We'd already done the LOI. We'd already mostly through the due diligence process. They were trying to turn that LOI into a stock purchase agreement, and they were just butting heads. They weren't making any room. The seller's attorney is way off their rocker. Me and the other broker, out of our own pocket, hired another attorney to come in to negotiate between the two attorneys and get the deal done.
Did it work?
It did work, and we closed. But that's the importance of having an attorney that's used to working in that world, because just hiring a business attorney that does not help people buy and sell businesses, they have no idea how things work and run. You know what I mean? And it makes the chance that. So we can, if you don't have that attorney, and a lot of times if you have a good attorney that you have a lot of respect for, that attorney may have a recommendation of an attorney that does that. And of course, we can give you some names and numbers of different attorneys too. We work with some great attorneys.
And sometimes, I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to buyer and seller whenever they want to get their legal counsel involved.
Right.
But if you haven't yet up until this point in the transaction, it's a good time to have somebody review the contract before you sign it.
Yeah, it is. And you know, this is about a team. You know, this is a team between the seller should have, you know, on their team, you know, us or a qualified, educated, experienced in business intermediary. Hopefully it's me or Carey. Mm-hmm. But, you know, us, you know, an attorney that knows M&A. Your CPA should be on board. And, you know, you might even want to talk to a tax attorney that specializes in, you know, helping sellers that are selling their business with tax situations. And we can always put you in touch or put your CPA in touch with a tax attorney as well. Mm-hmm. So let's say you have a seller and they receive two offers, two asset purchase agreements. Typically, that seller is going to look at both of the contracts. It's going to look a little foreign to them. The first thing they're going to say is, who's got the highest purchase price? Right.
There are often times that the highest purchase price is just dangling a carrot because there's a whole bunch of terms and conditions.
Hidden stuff in there that weakens that deal a lot.
Right.
You're absolutely right.
So it's not just the purchase price. It's how long is the due diligence? Is there an earn-out? What is the holdback? You know, what other types of items are in there that makes it a less satisfying offer to the seller? So we'll do what we can in the best of our ability to interpret the contract and tell them what we think, advise them to speak to their legal counsel, and together as a group, we will come up with the seller for the best offer to accept. And
sometimes it goes beyond price and terms.
Yeah.
It's the seller that's most likely to get to the closing table as well. You know, if they're both getting an SBA loan, you know, we got to get to that point where we feel comfortable with it. And backing up, remember I was telling you earlier in the episode that, you know, before I have the buyer-seller phone call, that I want to have that buyer have a pre-qual letter from an SBA lender. And I said, I don't care if it's my SBA lender or any other SBA lender. I just want to know that they have a pre-qual letter. Well, when an offer is submitted, I want that buyer really to reach out to one of my lenders, the lenders that I work with all the time, to get pre-qualified with one of my lenders. They're not required to use that lender, but I really want somebody that I have worked with on many, many occasions to be looking at as well from a lending standpoint to make sure that we can get to the closing table. But there's so many things when we're looking at those offers that we need to be looking at, you know, is it the best situation?
Yeah, there's a sniff test, there's a litmus test, and
sometimes you have to negotiate. You know, a lot of times you have to negotiate back and forth. You're negotiating the price, you're negotiating the terms, you're negotiating all this stuff. So even if you get a higher price, but you know, from buyer A, buyer B might be the better buyer. So obviously then we can go back to buyer B and we can negotiate better terms.
Right.
Best case world is we got buyer A, B, C, possibly D and E.
We got some good.
You know, I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is trying to create as much of that interest as we possibly can. That goes back to, you know, the first 30 days is critical mindset of trying to get the business under contract within the first 60 days, which doesn't always happen, but that's my goal.
Right.
You know, and I want to go on record, that doesn't always happen, but you know, 60, 70% of the time it does if we're really working together.
Yep.
You know.
And through our entire contract to close period, you're working alongside of a closing coordinator at Boss Group. And let's assume that we've now received multiple offers, picked an offer to move forward with, we're under contract.
Yep.
Buyer's going to place an escrow deposit with a closing attorney or an escrow attorney. And now we're going into the due diligence process. Let's talk about due diligence, which is a pain in the ass, to say the least.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a pain.
But it is so critical to make sure that the buyer is so comfortable with the business, they understand what they're getting into. And, I've been a part of due diligence processes that were fairly easy, I guess I would say. But I guess if the business is bigger, if the business has more clients, if there's more clout there, it can be a pretty arduous process. So we're going into due diligence. Let's talk about how that works.
Right, absolutely. And before we do that, I do want to give a shout out to Stephanie.
Yes.
Stephanie's been with our company now for over 10 years. She's our closing coordinator, and she is phenomenal. I'm telling you, I can't give enough credit to Stephanie. She's critical in the entire process. And I'm going to say that I put Stephanie, she's not a business broker, she's our closing coordinator, but I would put her up against almost any business broker out there. I don't know a business broker out there that would be better than Stephanie at the closing process.
She's done so
because that's all she does. She concentrates on it. That's all she does, and she does so many deals a year because she's the closing coordinator for all of Boss Group, and she's been doing it for so many years, and she does so many deals a year, and she's got a great personality. She's just a cornerstone. So I know we got off subject, but I wanted to give a huge shout out to Stephanie because I think Stephanie's amazing. So anyways,
absolutely.
So what is the due diligence process? You're right. Like the buyer has the right. Thank you for buzzing that, by the way. The buyer has the right to make sure that the information they've been provided up to that point, the financials, etc., are what they've been claimed to be. This is a critical part of the process. And so they're going to be asking for different items. They're going to be asking for bank statements, maybe merchant service statements, the actual tax returns, because most of the time they have not received the actual tax returns up to this point. Maybe sales certificates. The list goes on and on and on of different things that they might want. Some buyers ask for very little. Some buyers ask for a lot. And, sometimes when they ask for a lot, most of the stuff doesn't apply. The seller doesn't have access to. But, it can be a little time consuming for the seller to put all this information together. But I think it's important that as a seller that you're going to have to put this information together. And I almost recommend that after listing the business and before we go to the market, we could provide you a sample list or a couple sample lists of due diligence items that buyers ask for, so that you and your team can start putting them together. So you kind of get ahead of the game. You can do it. You can do it as you're going until it goes under contract, so it doesn't seem overwhelming. But because you're trying to run a business, we get that.
So in this purchase contract, there's typically multiple contingencies. And the contingencies are placed in the contract to protect a buyer should the due diligence not check out, or should they decide that they don't want to buy the business because of things that did not check out. So during due diligence, the number one contingency that's almost always there is a financial contingency where buyer is reviewing financial documentation to make sure that it is true. They're looking at, like Jim said, bank statements to make sure that income is verified, expenses are verified. But there's a lot of other contingencies that can be located inside of a purchase contract that during the due diligence period we're looking to hopefully overcome. Some of those are, for example, landlords. Mm-hmm. If the buyer is acquiring a business that the seller has a lease with a landlord, there has to be a contingency in that contract that the landlord approves the buyer to take over that existing lease.
Right.
So we'll call it a lease contingency. We also have a contingency for franchise. If it is a franchise business and a buyer is acquiring a franchise, not only is it up to the seller to allow the buyer to buy the business, but the franchisor has to grant permission as well. A lot of times there are training or certifications. A lot of times this happens with franchises, but you could be going to get to buy a business where you're acquired to have some type of licensure. Maybe it's a contractor license, or maybe it's a specialty license that is a contingency. For example, buyer is buying a business that has a specialty license that the seller uses to operate the business. Buyer tries to get that license. Buyer is only going to place the purchase contract contingent upon their ability to successfully get that same type of certification.
And what and a lot of times with those specialty type licenses, they may not qualify for that license before closing, obviously. So a lot of times the seller will have to carry the license or find somebody that can carry that license until the buyer can get that license.
A qualifier.
themselves. Yeah, to qualify that business.
And one of the last contingencies, just to bring up, as we talk about contracts today, is a financing contingency. If it is not a cash transaction, that contract that the buyer placed is contingent upon that buyer successfully receiving financing from their financial institution, or in most cases, the Small Business Administration, the SBA. So the buyer would be protected in this purchase contract with all of these contingencies. If all of the contingencies are released and due diligence has been completed, and they sign off on all of those contingencies, we're now moving towards a closing date.
Yeah.
Most all contracts say on or before some particular date that buyer and seller have agreed upon. So our goal is, as brokers, we want to get a deal done as fast as possible. Time kills deals, but of course we want to make sure that all contingencies are met. So now we work towards a closing date. All contingencies are met. Buyer and seller are ready to close. We've reached closing day. How does this usually go?
Closing day?
Yeah.
Most of my closings right now are happening virtual.
Right.
We can do the closing in person and sit around a table, but right now it's mainly, I've seen mainly happening virtual. Where the documents are being sent out. Usually the documents are sent out 4 or 5 days before closing so that both parties can review those documents, have the attorneys review them, and then they're executing them. And
who prepares the closing documents?
It depends. If there is a closing attorney involved in the situation, then the closing attorney would be preparing the documentation. And the closing attorney usually does not represent the buyer or the seller. They're just there. Think of it like a title company when you're buying or selling a home. But other times when the seller has an attorney and the buyer has an attorney, this happens a lot with stock sales, and we're dealing with a stock agreement. The stock agreement becomes the closing paperwork. They're just executing it at the closing table at that point.
So there are often times where a buy side attorney will write the closing docs. There's also times where a sell side attorney will write the closing docs. It depends on the structure of the deal.
Right.
And we'll address deal structures in another segment.
And then there's other times that the actual, an LOI is put up by the buyer, and we go back and forth with that. They execute the LOI, letter of intent, and then fast forward, they get towards the end of due diligence, the buyer's attorney and the seller's attorney are going back and forth with a stock agreement, and that stock agreement, when it's all agreed upon by both parties, is not signed until closing. It's signed at closing, and that's acting as the contract / closing documents at the same time. So it all depends, and that's what makes it really difficult right now to be talking from contract to closing, because every business is a little bit different on all the little things that we need to do, and how the whether it's an LOI or an APA or a stock agreement, everything kind of it changes a lot. So it's hard to do one blanket video. I guess we could try to attempt to do one blanket video, but in today's talk, it'll be kind of hard to go through all that. But from contract to closing, it's a lot of work for the buyer, a ton of work for the buyer. They're putting, if they're working with the SBA lender, they're getting all the information they need to do. They're doing the due diligence on the business itself. They're trying to get qualified by the SBA lender. You have to get insurances and set up their corporation, and they have to put a business plan together, and the list goes on and on and on. And then for us as brokers, there's a lot of work to do, because we're managing that whole process, or helping to manage that whole process, from the SBA lender to the attorneys to any of the CPAs that are involved, the buyer, the seller. I mean, there's a ton of stuff there. The seller is probably got the least amount of work out of all the parties, but it's still a good amount of work, and it's mainly trying to get all that information together. And that's why, again, it would be nice to, if the seller can start getting that information before we even go to market, just slowly get it, so that by the time we go under contract, it's all sitting there, and they're not trying to spend two days, trying to get everything together.
It's such a good point. I mean, today's topic, which is the process of selling a business, all the things that we've talked about, if the seller is educated on this, even before he's ready to, or she is ready to sell his or her business, we can start this process well before. Here are the things that you need to do. And you can go onto our website and you can ask us. We're happy to have a phone call. or engage with anybody about all the stuff that we talked about today and expand upon it. But the fact of the matter is, hiring a business intermediary and working with a business broker alleviates a lot of these things that a seller has never went through before, and we're here to help make that process as easy as we possibly can. We talked about all the steps leading up to closing, but
we didn't get too detailed.
Yeah, we didn't get too detailed.
I mean, we're trying to take a ton of like a couple hundred hours of work, not on the seller's part, but on us as business intermediaries, taking a couple hundred hours, and we're trying to
put it into 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah, trying to put it in 30, 40 minutes. So I know we're skipping over a lot of stuff, but that's what we'll be doing throughout the process. Is you're watching the video now, but we'll be kind of educating you, overview. And then, throughout the process, we're going to be feeding you more and more in-depth information, as we go through the process. And you should feel, pretty comfortable about it,
So we mentioned closing, but that's not the last step. Getting across the finish line is where everybody can take a big sigh of relief and say, we got it done. Buyer's happy they have a new business. Seller's happy they sold their business. Let's talk about post-closing.
Yeah,
because almost every single agreement has some type of thing in that contract that has an obligation on a buyer or sell side or both after a closing.
Yeah, and the biggest one of those is that the seller training the buyer post-closing. Once we close in that business, the seller's got to work with the buyer to get them up to speed on that business. And that could be 2 weeks, that could be 4 weeks, is usually included in the asking price, depending on the type of business. And then sometimes buyers want the seller to be there for, a couple months longer, or a year longer. It could even be longer than that. It's between the buyer and the seller. That's paid. That's additional pay on top of the asking price once you get past 30 days. And that could be a mixture of full-time working there, part-time working there, or just acting as a consultant. There's a lot of different things to do that.
A lot of times, the businesses that we sell, they're in the Main Street arena. That seller is a huge critical part of the business. They have that historic knowledge, intrinsic knowledge of the business, and buyer feels comfortable when seller stays involved. I've seen a lot of situations where the seller stays on as a consultant and then eventually comes back and works for the business or becomes a sales representative for the business or a spokesman because they want to do it or because they feel obligated to do it or they're looking for something to do.
And that's going back to that initial conversation when we first started this video, and I was saying when I'm talking to a seller for the first time, or one of the first times, is I'm trying to get what they want out of this. And I want to, at some point, early in the stage, have that conversation is, once you close in this business, how long do you want to spend in that business, post-closing? Mm-hmm. Do you want to be there for 30 days, training the buyer, and then, go your own way? Are you okay being there for 6 months, which for paid on top of it, being paid, and that makes it more attractive to a buyer. Sometimes I've got a deal going on right now. The seller wants to work there for a couple of years post closing. That was very appealing to a buyer. So it's all gauging what post closing. What are you willing to spend? Because we don't want to we want to know that up front so that when we're talking to buyers, we can tell the buyers up front before we even have buyer-seller phone calls.
Sellers looking to do this.
Yeah, the seller's willing to do this and seller's not willing to do this. Because you've got a buyer that's like, no, I'd want any seller to be there for a year. And you're working with a seller that's like, we're moving to another country. We're going to move up north and or move out to California to be with our grandkids.
Yep.
They don't want to be there for a year.
It's matching the motivations.
It's matching the motivations, and that's why those kind of calls are important up front. It's getting to know, and this is a critical thing. I feel like in the very beginning we were talking about the emotional aspect and trying to understand each other from a personal standpoint, and then the rest of the video we're kind of talking more about the tactics and the logistics, and I think that's really important to know. But to make this full circle, this is all about people. It's about us understanding and getting to know the seller. It's the seller getting to know us and understanding us and having faith in us that we're advising them and that we have the knowledge base to advise them to through the sale of the process. And it's important that the seller and the buyer have a good relationship between each other. We've said it a couple times that the seller's got to like and trust the buyer, and the buyer's got to like and trust the seller. And that means, and I mean that genuinely. This is about relationships.
Yeah, relationships above all. That's how
it really is. It really is.
And I honestly think that's a great way to wrap up, episode 2, which is the process of selling your business. We talked about so many nuances, so many little tactics, but at the end of the day, we're here to help through all of those, and it's really about getting a buyer and a seller to talk about what the next step of their lives are as the seller exits and the buyer comes in. We really appreciate you listening to all of our information today, and if you want to dive into anything deeper, we're always here to answer your questions.
Yeah, please give us a call. We'd love to talk to you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Boss Talk.